Dearest Texas history scholars, today we're looking at Unit 9, Part 1, Modernizing Texas. First, we have a timeline of events. In 1866, the Melrose Petroleum Oil Company drilled the first successful oil well. Oil was found in Corsicana. From 1880 to 1820 is the Progressive era. In the year 1900, there was a hurricane. Back then, hurricanes didn't have names. Spindletop happened in 1801. The start of World War I was in 1914. 1917 to 1918, the United States joined and was fighting in World War I. And then next we have Prohibition, which is the outlawing of alcohol. Notice that consumption was not made illegal, which creates a market because demand exists. We could pause and talk about economics and supply and demand, or we could continue on with the notes. In 1920, women's suffrage passed. That was the 19th Amendment. New oil fields were found in East and West Texas during the 1920s. The Galveston hurricane happened in 1900, and that was the most important Texas port. It was Galveston, and it was an island just off the coast. Galveston is still an island. Hurricanes were a frequent threat, but they weren't expecting one as powerful as they got on September 8th, 1900. It struck Galveston with heavy rains and winds of 120 miles per hour. There was lots of flooding. Between 6,000 and 8,000 people were killed. Thousands of people were left homeless, and half of the city of Galveston was destroyed. As a response to that, the city built a seawall, and the seawall is 17 feet long, or actually it's 17 feet tall. It's 20 feet thick, which is pretty large, and then 9 miles long. It's still there. It tends to be like a dry area where it is, because it's not common for the water to get up that high. And so right now it has like a lot of graffiti on it if we were to pause and Google the Galveston seawall. It's really beautiful. As Galveston recovered, other port cities, especially Houston, grew in size. And then the buildings in Galveston were raised as much as 10 feet. Next page. Spindletop is about petroleum. Petroleum or oil is used to make gasoline and kerosene. In January of 1901, there was a huge oil discovery at Spindletop Field in southwest Texas near the city of Beaumont. And that became a boom town. First of many boom towns with rapid population growth. Houston became the center of the oil industry. Oil brought thousands of workers to Texas, and it helped fund public education in Texas. That's still true. And supported other areas of the economy. Laws were soon passed to regulate the oil industry. Dallas dominates. By 1900, Dallas was a major city in North Texas. Excellent railroad system and a center for white-collar jobs. The Dallas population doubled. Dallas population doubled between 1900 and 1910. Out here on this star, I want to just clarify what the term white collar means. So if you'll please write this with me. A white collar worker is someone that works in an office. or another like certified professional in a professional environment. And then that is not the same, so not equal to blue collar workers. A blue collar worker is someone that does manual labor, or they do factory work. Anything that is not an office is a blue collar job. So drilling for oil, that's blue collar. But if you are an accountant for the oil company, then you're white collar. So there's a contrast there in the population. And they tend to move to similar areas of town because they can afford similar type homes. So that's an interesting divide that we see in society during this time. Progressives. The progressive movement was an effort to solve societal or political problems. The biggest issues were women's rights and the temperance movement. Women's suffrage. Women had been fighting for their right to vote for years. They wanted better schools, they wanted more public parks, and they wanted public health services. In 1918, Texas women got the right to vote by making a deal with Governor Hobby in his next election. And then the 19th Amendment passed in 1920, and that was added to the United States Constitution, which gave women full voting rights. Next page. Progressives fought to prohibit alcohol. In 1919, the Progressives won, and Prohibition was written into the United States Constitution. It became illegal in the United States to make, buy, sell, or drink alcohol. In the 18th Amendment was very unpopular, and it eventually was repealed with the 21st Amendment in 1933. Changing culture. In the 1920s, Texas industries boomed, and immigrants kept coming into Texas for cheap land. I put a star here because we need to talk about the difference between rural and urban areas. So an urban area means that there's a high population. And a rural area, that's a really hard word to spell, means that there's a low population. And if it's somewhere in between, kind of like the city of Abilene, you would call it a suburban area. And most suburban areas are outside of major cities, and so they tend to be like the center of the city is here, and then they grow out, and then on the outskirts of town is the suburbs, and then outside of that is rural areas where there's like farms and ranches and things like that. So suburban means that there is a medium population. It's not high or low. It's just people live there in a group. Rapid growth of cities led to greater need for roads, utilities, and other services. People had leisure time and they enjoyed movies, dancing, radio, and sports. Unit 9, Part 2, Texas in World War I. World War I had many causes. We could pause the video and talk about why I put this symbol here. We might do that, we might not. World War I broke out in Europe between the Allied powers and Great Britain, France, and Russia. And then the Central Powers, which were Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. We could pause the video and write those right here. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on. The assassination of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the immediate cause of World War I. Next, Unit 9, Part 2, page 2. The United States remained neutral until two major things happened. First, it was the sinking of the Lusitania. That was sunk by a German U-boat, which is like a submarine. And then the German ambassador, Arthur Zimmermann, both of those are spelled right here, by the way. Zimmermann sent a telegram to Mexico saying that if Mexico were to join Germany, then they could win Texas back from the United States. But the letter was intercepted and shared on the news, and so we call that the Zimmermann note or the Zimmermann telegram. The sinking of the Lusitania, a British passenger ship, was sunk by a German U-boat. That also means submarine. 1,200 people were killed, including 128 Americans. So you can imagine that made the American government really angry. The Zimmermann note, the German ambassador sent a message to Mexico, offering them the chance to reclaim lost territory, including Texas, if Mexico would join the Central Powers of the war. The United States intercepted the message. They shared it on the news. Everyone found out, like the American people found out, and it just kind of raised tensions against Mexico and against Germany. On the home front, that means back in the United States, while our troops were fighting in Europe, there was about 2,000 Texans that went to what we called at the time the Great War, because we didn't know that there was going to be a second World War. We thought that was the only one, so it was just called the Great War at the time. 500 Texans died in World War I. People across the state bought bonds and gave money to the Red Cross to support the war effort. I put a star over here because you may not know what bonds are. Bonds are what it's called when the government borrows money from citizens. We can pause the video and talk about that, but maybe we're done pausing at this point. Many women entered the workforce. There's a picture of Rosie the Riveter on my wall that symbolizes women working during a wartime. Creating war supplies and factories. With the United States helping the Allied forces, World War I ended with the Allied victory in 1918. I put a star here because I need you to understand before we put these notes away that the Allied powers, which includes the United States, they won World War I. So we were on the winning side of World War I. Germany was on the losing side. We could go into more detail about that. World War I is a cause of World War II. Okay, those are your notes. Best of luck on your open notes quiz. Make sure that you do the map on the next page.